Hello Internet, I am Aries 1080p, and today we will be talking about the holy grail of game development, the number one most important concept, in my opinion, that can make or break a video game, and that determines from start to finish if this game can support a competitive scene, if this game can support any type of competitive multiplayer or competitive cooperative game modes of any kind. Now this, which I speak about, is the skill gap. The skill gap, to simplify it, is the amount of skill that separates the average player from the upper tier player. Every game has some form of skill gap for one reason or another, whether it be to make it more difficult to get to the highest skill or to make it very easy. A game of Dora the Explorer for your computer obviously has a minimalist skill gap because it is designed for a little kid. There is no need to master the game or to become the best of the best at the game. It's just pick up and play so a young child can learn their colors, their numbers, and their shapes. Now a game like a League of Legends, a Dota 2, Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, any of these games all have higher skill gaps because they obviously have some type of pro scene. There is a difference between being a casual player of any of these games and being the very best of the best. There is a large amount of skill that separates these two groups. Now I've got an image that I'm going to overlay on the screen. This right here is your breakdown of the skill gap from average rank to the highest tier rank in some of the franchises that I've listed. We have the Gold Nova 2 to the Global Elite in Counter-Strike, Gold Nova 2 being the average rank, which that is in fact the average rank. Feel free to do your research on that, because I know I did. And Global Elite obviously being the highest matchmaking rank. Then we've got Overwatch, we've got H1Z1, and then for Call of Duty there isn't really a competitive rank in each game, so I just did a Prestige 1 versus a Prestige Master in Black Ops 2, just to outline the point I'm trying to make. But each one of these games has a certain differential in skill from top to bottom. Counter-Strike has a hypothetical 500 skill points dividing the average player from the highest tiers of players. Then for Overwatch we've got 450, H1Z1 being 125, and Call of Duty being 100. Now these numbers are obviously not 100% accurate, and they don't really represent any measurable value, but they are a loose concept that I think accurately represents what I am trying to talk about. I believe that Counter-Strike and Overwatch have a higher skill gap than that of H1Z1. However, I feel H1Z1 has a higher skill gap than Call of Duty. And then we can go up and down the list as we feel. We can gradually get to easier and easier games and harder games that separate the best from the worst. Now, the overall theme that I'm trying to reach with today's episode is that we shouldn't complain about the higher ends of the skill gaps, but rather we should embrace that each game has its own unique skill gap, and that it should encourage us to play more and to become better at any game that we want to excel at. If everyone out there could just become a Global Elite in Counter-Strike, or a royalty on H1Z1, or just pick up Call of Duty and wake up and they're a pro the next day, there'd be no fun in playing these games. There's a reason that the wheat are separated from the chaff. There needs to be some amount of gratification for working all this way to the upper tier ranks. And in games like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, and Overwatch, these ranking systems serve a purpose. They allow it so that you're only match made against players who are within your skill group to increase the fairness within the match. Now, these systems don't always work perfectly on account of hackers in these games and smurfs and all different problems that anyone who plays these games has obviously had to deal with before. But the system does help. In games like H1Z1, however, it's a rank mosh pit. So if you happen to be a bronze rank in H1Z1 and you just happen to have a blessed zone, and the zone happens to just surround you, and you're one of the last two alive but you're against a royalty, there's a 95% chance you're not going to win the match. It's because that game has a mosh pit of ranks that does not separate the wheat from the chaff, and it enables the higher tier players to win more consistently and the less skilled players to seldomly win. Now, which system is better? Obviously, it makes sense that the higher skilled players, the upper tier players, should have a reward for being higher tier players. They should obviously win more often against lower skilled opponents. It makes sense that the higher tier players should win more often than the lower tier players. But is that really enjoyable? Because think about it, have you ever played a game of Call of Duty and there's just one guy in the lobby who's dropping 50 kills, he's calling in kill streaks, he's destroying your whole team? Now that game is awesome for him, he's having a blast, but for the other 6 people on the other team, it's awful. They're getting completely shit on, they can't leave their spawn, they can't capture the objectives, and they can't get any kills. It's no fun. So there is some extent of the skill gap that needs to be compressed with some games, because although it makes sense for the higher tiered players to get the most reward, to be able to win the easiest, and to be able to dominate the most, it also ruins the enjoyment for the other players. Because if you are in the top 5% of players, you're exactly that, in the top 5%. What about the other 95%? They're the majority of the people who play the game. They're the main consensus. What matters to these developers who are trying to make profit off of their game is that the majority of players enjoy the games, not necessarily the people who play the games the most hardcore or for the greatest results. Now, these development studios, for all of these games that we enjoy, need to walk a fine line that separates the enjoyment of the most versus the enjoyment of the most important, so to speak. The higher tiered players need to enjoy the game. They don't want to feel alienated from the game or the series that they took this much time to learn and perfect. But you also can't have these dominating forces completely overpowering the lower skilled players and making those lower skilled players not want to play anymore. There has to be some amount of balance that these developers need to find, and it can be hard. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this is just to compress the skill gap. Make it so that no matter what, the highest skilled players will still be able to be beaten by the lower skilled players in some occasions. You don't see this very often in games like Counter-Strike or Overwatch. 9 times out of 10 the best player is going to win. But in a game like Call of Duty, for example, where there's random ass jackpot spawns and random factors out of the player's control, there's ways that the lower tier player can get an advantage. If I'm a high tier player and I'm spawn camping you in a match of domination, all that you need is just for one lucky spawn off of the flag that I'm trying to spawn camp, and then you can just walk up and shoot me in the back with nothing that I can do about it. In a game like Overwatch, where there's set spawns, if I'm completely spawn camping you, you're shit out of luck. You're being spawn trapped. Now, with that said, games like Overwatch and Counter-Strike have found a wonderful balance by making it so that these players in the higher skill groups and in turn the lower skill groups are matched with people of their own skill, so that way every group can have fun and fair matches playing one another. With this knowledge about skill gaps in hand, it is now our duty as the players of these games to be up in arms for our developers to say, experiment with the skill gap. We need games with different skill gaps for different people. We can't have every game being a rudimentary, easy as shit game that anyone can feel like they're the king of the town on. We need games that are difficult and that push us, but we also need games that we can fall back on that we know we aren't going to have to push ourselves to excel at. If I'm having a bad day on Counter-Strike, I always know that I can boot up Call of Duty and go drop a shit ton of kills in a public match lobby and feel good about myself. We need a little bit of everything for a little bit of everybody. And next time you're playing a match of Counter-Strike or of League of Legends or of any game that has a competitive ranking and you're being smurfed on, don't complain. Just be glad that every other match you play, or the majority of the matches you play, are smurf free. Because although there might be the occasional violation of this skill gap, think about a game like a Call of Duty or an H1Z1 that I've already explained is a mosh pit of ranks. Anyone can be in there. So next time someone makes fun of you for being a Silver Elite Master, don't let it bother you, because that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you're against people of your own skill and that you're slowly working through the ranks to improve. For if everyone could become a global elite, why would anyone want to become a global elite? There needs to be that level of magic to reaching that highest rank, that pinnacle of skill that makes it so that the highest of the high tier players can feel like their time spent was well worth it. As I was saying before, the occasional smurf might bog you down, but just be glad that you don't have to deal with a smurf every game, or that every game you're not losing to the highest skilled of the most highly skilled there are on the game, because of its skill-based matchmaking system and the fact that there is a high skill gap, but at least it's managed with these games like Counter-Strike and Overwatch. Each game walks a fine line, as I said before, and hopefully as the generations come on, we can get games that hone in on these skill gaps and can find that perfect balance that makes the game just right. Overwatch and Counter-Strike are two of the highest selling games in recent history. They have sold millions of copies, and they've done it very quickly. And the reason they do this is that they have tons of room for improvement, but they also don't alienate these lower skilled players. They have found the balance. We just have to hope that as we continue along, more games will find this perfect middle ground. And until we reach that time, and until next time, I'm Aries1080p. Good night, Internet.